It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Thames Water, the UK's largest water company in billions of pounds of debt, its future in question. The government says it's making plans to protect customers.
I was concerned to hear that the CEO had resigned abruptly, but we need to make sure that Thames Water as an entity survives.
Russia says a missile strike which has killed at least 11 people in Ukraine was aimed at NATO instructors. Also tonight, we track down, review and verify hundreds of videos from the Wagner Group's march on Moscow. A national investigation is launched into mental health care after concerns are raised by patients. Daniel Korski, one of the Conservative hopefuls to be London Mayor, drops out of the race after allegations of groping. Actor Kevin Spacey arrives in court in London for the start of his sexual offences trial. And protesters get caught out by the cricketers after targeting the Ashes at Lord's. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. The country's biggest water supply could be on the brink of collapse. Yesterday, Sky News reported that the government had begun looking at contingency plans for Thames Water, which is in £14 billion worth of debt. Well, the company supplies water to 15 million customers in London and the South East, and it's been criticised for its sewage leaks and overspill in rivers. Now, Thames Water says it's trying to secure funding to protect customers, and the industry regulator has promised to crack down on all water companies not going far enough to support households with bills. Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso has this report.
Before these anglers cast any lines, they test the water for something much less palatable than fish.
This is the phosphate one, and this is the one we're really interested in. The government recommendation for rivers in the UK is less than 0.1.
Take a walk for half a mile up there, you'll see a little stream that's got absolutely no life in it whatsoever, and that's all from sewage treatment works.
Just a few miles upstream from Thames Water's head office, pollution of the Kennet is evidence, say campaigners, of a floundering company in a failing system.
We've got a broken water sector, absolutely no doubt about it. And what's happened to Thames Water is probably going to happen to other companies. Since privatisation, we've seen something like £55 billion go out of the industry and into the pockets of shareholders in dividends. I'm not arguing necessarily for renationalisation. What I'm arguing is a complete reset for the water industry, tough, effective regulation, and putting in the investment we need to avert both an economic and environmental disaster.
From the riverbank to the boardroom, Britain's biggest water company is in crisis. Chief Executive Sarah Bentley resigned without explanation. With the company navigating a river of debt, record leaks and concerns over sewage, ministers are preparing for the possibility it may go bust, including plans for a taxpayer-backed special administration.
We need to make sure that Thames Water as an entity survives. There's a lot of work that the government is trying to do on resolving sewage. At the moment, or certainly up until now, the regulator has been focused on keeping consumer bills down. But there's a lot of infrastructure work that needs to take place.
Serving 1 in 4 English households, Thames Water is also the most indebted water company. With £14 billion of borrowing and interest rates rising, it's asked its shareholders, including Canadian and British pension funds, for £1 billion to keep it afloat.
Thames Water isn't the only water company under financial pressure, but if it collapses, it will be the biggest challenge to the privatisation model since state utilities were sold off in the 80s and 90s, piling cost onto the taxpayer and raising a fundamental question. Is it really possible to keep bills down and turn a profit while providing the investment needed to keep our rivers clean?
Public disgust at widespread sewage dumping has piled pressure on regulator Ofwat as well as ministers. But new infrastructure cost money and bills seem certain to rise.
There's about 70 billion needs to be invested in total in water supply and in sewerage improvement, control of our sewage over the next 30 years. So that's a lot of money. And one way or another, either through general taxation or through our bills, we're going to be paying for that.
Patience is a virtue on the riverbank. We may all need it. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Berkshire.
Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, joins us now from Downing Street. Meetings held by the Chancellor today. Sam, customers very much at the top of his mind and others. How will they be protected?
Well, all over, Anna, I think that there is trouble ahead for the government. Look at Thames Water. Ministers absolutely do not want to take that back into public ownership. They don't want to be holding that problem-strewn company with the spills, with the sewage, at a time where it's got massive debt that the taxpayer might have to foot the bill for, and ultimately be in charge at a point where prices come up, as well as this question of whether or not nationalising Thames Water effectively calls into question the free market ideology, the journey that the Tories took the water services in England and Wales on since 1989. And that's really, that ideological question is the heart of all sorts of things that have been going on today in Westminster. You just mentioned Jeremy Hunt's meeting with the watchdogs, the regulators, 5 of them today, from energy to markets to financial services to water and telecom. And in essence, he was going round the room, it seems, from the readout afterwards and telling those watchdogs to do more to bring down prices, to do more to intervene in the market. The markets aren't working at this point of high inflation and customers struggling with the cost of living crisis. All of that means that the Conservatives have to rethink their whole approach to governing. It's effectively the moment where political ideology meets questions of existential survival for the Conservative Party. It means that conservatism itself isn't much in evidence at the moment.
In Downing Street, thank you. The missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk, which hit a popular pizza restaurant, has killed at least 11 people. It's thought to be the first significant attack by the Russians since the Wagner Group made a military advance on Moscow and has been described as a targeted attack on civilians. Well, the Kremlin spokesperson has told Sky News that the target was military, while Russian TV claimed the missile strikes were aiming at NATO instructors. Kramatorsk is less than 20 miles behind the front line. It's come under attack a number of times and had been thought to be the next target after Russian forces took control of Bakhmut. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, reports now from the capital, Kyiv.
Minutes after the missile landed in a residential neighbourhood, people stumble around dazed, the streets filled with dust. Ukrainians say Russians fired a short-range ballistic missile directly into Kramatorsk city centre. The aftermath was horrific. A race to save the injured, a frantic search for survivors under the debris. Mikhail was hurt and had no idea what had happened to his friends.
Tell me, is there anyone you know under the rubble?
I don't know who is there. My colleagues are there.
You got out on your own?
Yes.
The missile struck at the busiest time for a popular pizza restaurant. Families were enjoying an evening meal. 14-year-old twins Anya and Yulia Aksenchenko had only popped in to get ice cream. Now among at least 4 children killed. 8-month-old Mia sustained cuts to the head from the blast and a broken bone. Her mother says they'd barely arrived when the missile struck.
Our situation is stable. I was also stitched up a bit. It's not a big deal compared to my child.
The Ukrainians say the Russians used a precision-guided Iskander ballistic missile to do this, with a margin of error of just 7 metres. They claim to have arrested a Russian agent in Kramatorsk who helped coordinate the missile strike.
Each such manifestation of terror proves over and over again to us and the whole world that Russia deserves only one thing as a result of everything it has done: defeat and a tribunal, fair and legal trials against all Russian murderers and terrorists.
In Moscow, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told Sky News the target was not civilians.
The Russian Federation does not strike civilian infrastructure. Strikes are carried out on objects that are somehow connected to military infrastructure.
On Russian state TV, the attack was said to be a successful strike on NATO instructors in the area and a Ukrainian military command. NATO says it has no instructors in Ukraine. The Ukrainian military says Russia's claims are nonsense. Only civilians were killed, only civilian infrastructure destroyed in this attack. The fear is that Russia is deliberately trying to terrorise Ukrainians on the home front as their counter-offensive picks up steam. And there could be many more of these kinds of attacks. It's the first big attack since these scenes played out in Russian cities over the weekend. The strike certainly shifted some attention away from the fiasco of that failed mutiny. The stakes are being raised in this war, with Ukraine's counter-offensive reporting some advances. Russia may plan to step up attacks far behind the front line. Ukraine has some air defences supplied after months of hesitation by the West, but not enough to stop all the missiles getting through and causing more of this kind of carnage. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News in Kyiv.
Well, that attack happened just a few days after the rebellion by the Russian militant group Wagner, led by Yevgeny Prigozhin. Sky's Data and Forensics Unit has reviewed and verified more than 100 videos released online, which appeared to show the group advancing on Moscow. Tom Cheshire has been analysing what the pictures tell us.
This is the anatomy of a mutiny. The Sky News Data and Forensics team and the Centre for Information Resilience have reviewed and verified more than 130 videos from Prigozhin's brazen convoy to Moscow. We can piece together exactly what went on and how it went off the rails. The first action was in Rostov-on-Don. This is the logistics hub for Russian forces in Ukraine. 42 of the videos we reviewed are from here. This first clip was filmed near the Southern Military District headquarters. You can see men in military fatigues moving through the city. They face apparently no opposition. And around the same time, in the headquarters itself, around the corner, Wagner Group leader, or perhaps former Wagner Group leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, shared footage of himself inside. Then Wagner starts moving. Voronezh is 350 miles north of Rostov-on-Don along the M4 motorway. Unlike in Rostov-on-Don, though, here the group meets resistance. The first sign that this convoy isn't a stunt, but an actual coup. Things quickly get chaotic. I'll take you through this next video. Some of it is hard to make out, but the takeaway is that it shows Russians fighting Russians. This was filmed in a car dealership on the outskirts of the city. Men in green fatigues, thought to be Wagner fighters, prepared to fire a likely anti-aircraft missile. And then as the video continues, you can see their target. It is a Russian helicopter. As it loops around the building, the missile is launched. Just 5 minutes drive south on the same road, another clip shows a helicopter, possibly the same one, narrowly evading a rocket, one that almost hits the person recording. Now, Wagner never made it inside Moscow, but the city was ready. Footage showed some of the Russian military's movements as it braced for potential armed confrontation. If Wagner's uncontested takeover of Rostov-on-Don might have made its actions look sanctioned, even stage-managed, in Moscow it was clear how seriously the threat was being taken. Trucks were deployed around the city, and roadblocks like this one were constructed on the approach routes. Footage like this from inside Russia and footage of a regime clearly on the back foot is rare. After the chaos of this coup, we're unlikely to have such a window in anytime soon.
Tom Cheshire reporting there. Now, the Health Secretary has launched an investigation into mental health inpatient services across the country. It comes after a series of investigations by Sky News highlighting failings within the system. Steve Barclay said that the Health and Safety Investigation Branch would look into the care of young people, examine staffing levels and scrutinise the quality of care within units. Our Home editor Jason Farrell has this report.
Last month, we showed images of sleeping staff at Wootton Lawn, a mental health unit in Gloucestershire, and heard stories of patients getting on the roof, wandering onto railway tracks, one being discharged, then throwing himself off a bridge minutes later.
Just walked out of the door and jumped headfirst off a bridge. And he had smashed his skull, smashed his face, had a brain hemorrhage, smashed 2 arms and 2 legs, and punctured his spleen.
The NHS Trust said it received positive feedback, but acknowledged they didn't always get things right. A year earlier, Sky News also gathered damning testimonies from numerous patients at mental health services run by Wagner Group.
I thought I went there to be kept safe, and I'd learn new ways to self-harm. I don't feel they made me any better. I think they made me a lot worse.
The group said it was taking steps to improve its care. But it's these stories and others that have led to the government launching a national investigation into inpatient mental health services.
The new Health Services Safety Investigations Body will investigate the following themes: how providers learn from deaths in their care and use this learning to improve services, including post-discharge; how young people are cared for in mental health inpatient settings, and how this can be improved.
There is already an inquiry into nearly 2,000 deaths over a 20-year period in mental health services in Essex. When it was launched, some campaigners, like Melanie Leahy, refused to take part because it didn't have the power to compel witnesses to give evidence. Her son Matthew died at the Linden Centre in Essex.
How many more have to die before the statutory powers are given?
2 years later, the inquiry chair complained that only 30% of staff witnesses were freely contributing to the investigation. So now the Health Secretary has given the inquiry the powers it needs to make people give evidence.
You know, this has taken over 10 years of my life to get this far. The people that have helped have been immense, but we now need to work so much harder now to get this inquiry up and running with the right terms of reference, the new chair, and, you know, we're ready to start work.
The scandal of mental health care failings have been slowly coming to light, and mostly through the sheer grit and determination of those who've suffered the consequences. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
The former advisor at Number 10, Daniel Korski, has pulled out of the running to become the Conservative candidate for the Mayor of London. Mr Korski denies an allegation of groping made by TV producer Daisy Goodwin, but said it had become a distraction. Ms Goodwin, who made a formal complaint today to the Cabinet Office, said she was glad he's withdrawn from the race. Our political correspondent Liz Bates reports.
Was this the moment that Daniel Korski's political career ended?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave now, but thank you very much for listening to me.
That abrupt exit after finding out he'd been accused of sexual assault was followed by 2 days of denials as he tried to carry on his campaign to be the next Conservative London mayor. But by this afternoon, it was all over. In a statement, he said, "I have decided with a heavy heart to withdraw from the Conservative mayoral contest. I categorically deny the allegation against me. However, the pressure on my family because of this false and unproven allegation and the inability to get a hearing for my message of the London dream makes it impossible for my campaign to carry on." Pensions Minister Mel Stride said publicly what many of his colleagues have been saying in private, that Mr Korski simply couldn't continue.
The political pressure here is such that he's probably taken the right decision, but it's not for me to opine as to whether the allegations are right or wrong. I know he denies them.
Daisy Goodwin was the woman who spoke out, saying that 10 years ago at a meeting in Downing Street, he touched her breast. And this morning, she described her struggle to get those in power to take it seriously.
I rang the switchboard for Number 10 and nobody wanted to put me through to anyone. And finally I got through to someone and they said, "Oh, we can't take messages." So I thought, well, that shows it's quite difficult to make a complaint.
On hearing of his withdrawal, she said, it shows that women can speak out and be believed. This has been a difficult period for the Conservative Party. Here at their HQ, they've been under pressure to explain why they didn't block Daniel Korski in the first place, given they knew of this allegation, and why they haven't launched an investigation since it all came to light.
Greg Hands, what are you doing about Daniel Korski?
Tory chair Greg Hands was tight-lipped, but this afternoon the party said the mayoral election process will now continue, with the two remaining candidates, Mozamel Hussain and Susan Hall. For Mr Korski, his journey into frontline politics ends here. Liz Bates, Sky News, Westminster.
The actor Kevin Spacey has appeared in court in London, where he's due to go on trial, accused of sex offences. The Hollywood star has previously denied 12 charges against 4 men, including sexual and indecent assault. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer has more from Southwark Crown Court.
Arriving 2 hours ahead of the start of his trial, an indication perhaps of how keen Kevin Spacey is to come to court to try to clear his name. A wall of photographers, nothing unusual for this A-lister. But in terms of stages he's appeared on, for Spacey, arguably how he comes across here has never mattered as much. In court, the Oscar winner spoke only to confirm his name, his lawyers previously insisting he welcomes the chance to finally tell his version of events. For Spacey, this has gone on now for over a year. Back in July 2022, he first appeared in court denying 5 allegations relating to 3 men between 2005 and 2013. 4 counts of alleged sexual assault and 1 of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. Then in January of this year, additional charges were added, made by a different complainant, alleged to have taken place between 2001 and 2005, including 3 charges of indecent assault, 3 of sexual assault, assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent, all of which Spacey has strenuously denied. Best known for starring in modern cinematic classics like American Beauty and The Usual Suspects, for the actor, this case has had a devastating impact on his career.
It's obviously a cloud hanging over him. He lost a role once the charges were announced. He hasn't really picked up much work since. So until the outcome is decided, I think it's going to be very difficult for him to get new work.
For years, the name Spacey was, for millions of movie lovers, synonymous with quality cinema. Now, with his career hanging in the balance, his fate rests with a much smaller audience, a select group of 12. The jury now sworn in, this trial soon to get underway. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Inexplicable and inexcusable, the words of the French President Emmanuel Macron today about the death of a 17-year-old who was shot by police during a routine check in a suburb of Paris. His death sparked violence across the French capital last night, with some people taking to the streets to protest tonight under a heavy police presence. From Paris, our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
His car in the Paris suburb of Nanterre. He had tried to drive off. Moments later, the car crashes, a passenger is apprehended, and a nation reacts. The policemen involved have both been arrested, but anger rapidly turned to fury and fire. In Nanterre, police came under attack, and when the fire brigade arrived, they too are pelted with rocks and fireworks. And it is all about this teenager, identified as Naël M., 17 years old, mourned by his mother.
I've lost a 17-year-old child. They took my baby. He was still a child. He needed his mother. This morning, he gave me a big kiss and told me he loved me. I said, "Be careful," and told him I love him.
The son's killing lit a fire that has long been simmering in Paris suburbs, where crime, racism and mistrust of the police are chronic problems. President Macron said the shooting was inexcusable. His interior minister called for calm and promised a prompt investigation into Naël's death.
I want to have a thought for him, for his family, and tell them that, of course, at the Interior Ministry and the National Police, we want to know as soon as possible the truth about what has happened, but respecting the judicial time.
Paris is a city that's very accustomed to protest and disorder, but what happened here in Nanterre really carries echoes of serious rioting that happened back in 2005. Now, that was also sparked by the death of a young man at the hands of the police. And those riots went on for 3 weeks. France has had to face up to the spectre of violent street battles, burnt-out cars, and even an arson attack on a town hall. 24 hours later, as we drive through the streets of Nanterre, the police are on patrol in big numbers. We see people stopped and arrested. In this country, the tension, like the summer heat, clings to you. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Nanterre.
Wreckage from the Titan submersible has been brought to shore in Canada. Several pieces of the sub were recovered and taken to St John's in Newfoundland from the Horizon Arctic ship. 5 people were killed, including 3 British citizens, when the submersible is believed to have imploded 10 days ago while attempting to view the Titanic. US President Joe Biden made a verbal slip today, saying Iraq when he meant Ukraine. While speaking to reporters, he was asked to what extent Vladimir Putin had been weakened by the attempted rebellion by the Wagner mercenary group.
It's hard to tell, but he's clearly losing the war in Iraq. He's losing the war at home. And he has become a bit of a pariah around the world.
Madonna has been forced to postpone several upcoming tour dates after spending several days in intensive care. Her management said the US pop star developed a serious bacterial infection on Saturday, but is expected to make a full recovery. The singer had been about to embark on her celebration tour of North America and Europe. Well, the second Ashes test had barely started when it was disrupted by Just Stop Oil protesters today. But quick hands from England wicketkeeper Johnny Bairstow saw one of the activists picked up and carried to the boundary. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris reports.
The start of the Ashes test at Lord's, the prestige event at the home of cricket, and a prime target for protesters. The end of the first over bowled by England, their chosen moment for disruption. Evading security to reach the outfield and spreading orange powder paint, the hallmark of Just Stop Oil.
England's Johnny Bairstow alert to the danger, carrying the defiant demonstrator back to the boundary rope, taking matters into his own hands. While across the pitch there was another activist, who was blocked by England captain Ben Stokes and Australia batter David Warner from reaching the square. But they were still able to disperse the powder before being wrestled to the ground.
The clean-up operation began swiftly. But the frustration of spectators was clear.
It's gotten ridiculous. They've done this so many times, and I understand their point. I agree with some of their points, but how they're going about it is terribly wrong.
I think Johnny Bairstow showed his Yorkshire roots by picking them up and carrying them off quite well. So I think they handled it quite well, the players, actually.
I don't believe that interrupting a sports match is the way to go about it, but, you know, what is the best way, I don't know.
Play was only disrupted for a few minutes, but the owners of Lord's said the activists showed complete disregard for the spectators. It's unlikely to be the last we've seen of sporting events being used as a platform for protest, with Just Stop Oil vowing to continue until the government stops issuing new oil and gas licences.
Powder protests also halted the World Snooker Championships in April and the Rugby Premiership final in May. Police warned this week of potentially deadly consequences of targeting the British Grand Prix again after this track invasion last year. But Just Stop Oil insists the dangers fossil fuels pose to the planet outweigh any dangers from protesting. And one of those Lord's protesters, 69-year-old Judith, told Just Stop Oil, "I have to take action for my 7 beautiful grandchildren. I can't bear to imagine the suffering that they will have to endure." 3 arrests were made at Lord's, and security will hope they aren't caught out again as the Ashes test continues. Rob Harris, Sky News, Lord's.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this story on the front page of The Eye about the financial crisis at Thames Water. The headline, UK taxpayers could bail out the failing firm owned by China and Abu Dhabi. Well, tonight I'll be joined by the Daily Mirror's associate editor Kev Maguire and the Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine. Back in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. Thames Water says it is working with shareholders to secure extra funds as it struggles with a £14 billion debt pile as ministers hold talks about the firm's possible collapse. At least 11 people have been killed in a Russian missile attack in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk, as the Kremlin says it was targeting NATO instructors. Conservative London mayoral hopeful Daniel Korski has dropped out of the race following groping allegations, which he denies. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making those headlines then with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail columnist, Sarah Vine. Welcome and great to see both of you. Front pages though, let's kick off, shall we, with the Metro. Amid suggestions that Thames Water could collapse, the Metro describes the company as on the brink. Here's The Guardian, their headline, crisis talks as Thames Water faces £10 billion deficit. According to The Eye, taxpayers in this country could be called upon to bail the firm out, despite it having stakeholders in China and Abu Dhabi. The Telegraph says that whole swathes of the UK water industry may have to be taken back into public ownership. Daily Mail reports that doctors planning to go on strike for more NHS pay will still be allowed to do private work on stoppage days. A source quoted in The Express warns that the government will fight members of the House of Lords who are against its proposed laws to stop small boats. And The Star tells us that the King isn't a fan of slugs. I could talk about slugs for a good half hour, but I won't. You'll be glad to know. Anyway, reminder, scan that QR code. You can check out those front pages for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Kevin Maguire and Sarah Vine. But it was about this time last night that our city editor, Mark Kleinman, broke the news about Thames Water, Kevin. But it's been picked up. We know the Chancellor's had meetings today. And really the question now is what next for Thames, for customers, and indeed for other water companies, if you look at those headlines?
No, absolutely. Thames, the country's biggest water provider, 15 million customers, has 14 billion debt. Metro says that's 80% of the value. The chief executive, Sarah Bentley's gone. And this is a genuine crisis. The government saying it'll keep the taps running. But what happens? Because I think water privatisation in England, they're all monopolies, has been a disaster. I think the overall figure is 1989, zero debt when they were privatised by the Thatcher government. Now they've got 54 billion debt. They've run up debt, and over the same period, the Financial Times was saying they've given out 72 billion in dividends to shareholders. So what happens next? Government steps in. Does it do what I think it should really happen? It would be hugely popular. Nationalise the entire industry. I think there's a YouGov poll showed 69% of people think that should happen. Water be better in the public sector, only 8% not. Or does it then try and find a new buyer? But this is a real crisis in a privatisation that I think has been a disaster.
Yes, and one of the architects of that Thatcherite sell-off today said, it was deliberately designed at the time to be extremely attractive, to both investors and the British people buying shares. But that wasn't meant to continue, and it does seem that there's been an over-generous dividends being paid, over-generous salaries been paid. Sarah, you're nodding there. And there seems to be some sort of creative accounting that's been going on and a failure of regulation. So it feels like this is sort of, deep into the mire, actually, for the water companies.
Yeah, well, it feels like someone's been asleep on the job, the regulator, because apart from anything else, these companies have been pumping loads of... Thames Water has one of the worst water wastage records of any company, and flooding and just generally mismanaging the whole system. Thames Water is my supplier, and it's a disaster. It's expensive. They charge you through the nose for it, and as far as I can tell, they're just incompetent. Kevin is right. It's a real. It's just really. It doesn't say much for privatisation, does it? Because this whole system has just been basically there for shareholders, investors to just take money. It was just literally just a sort of, they've just raped it as far as I can see. I mean, the amount of money that it owes is just astonishing, really, when you think about it.
There's always been quite a lot of sympathy for Thames, its Victorian system, the sewage works under London, all a massive amount of investment needed. But it seems to be the owner before the current owners of Thames that caused part of the problem here, Kevin. But is the days of that sympathy that I listed, I'm talking decades back probably for that, is that long gone? Have they had plenty of cash to sort this out, or do these companies need propping up anyway?
No, they've been giving it out to shareholders rather than investing it. I mean, people pay rather a lot for their water. Bills regularly go up by more than inflation. When they say it's a Victorian system, well, roads and footpaths are older than Victorian systems often, and you don't get the same complaints. There's no doubt there needs to be investment, but it hasn't happened soon enough. And if they'd have spent more money on investment instead of siphoning off profits, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess now. I think that Thames deserves no sympathy at all. They've rinsed us, Sarah says, and now it's coming out the roost. I just hope we don't see the losses are nationalised and profits are always privatised. It's water is a monopoly in any area. So if you privatise it, you would have to have the toughest regulation over it. But it's easier and simpler and better just to run it as a public service in the public sector, a bit like rail.
Yeah, the losses and nationalised question makes the front of a number of papers. The Guardian, we saw there. The government, it says, has no true grasp on the costs involved in preventing a collapse of Thames Water, with estimates presented to ministers and regulators suggesting the company could face a hole of £10 billion in its finances. Obviously, it's going back to its investors at the moment. And the Eye says that UK taxpayers could bail out the failing water firm, which is partially owned by China and Abu Dhabi, nations that have stakes in Thames Water. So as Kevin said, you get the losses being nationalised in issues like this. Kemi Badenoch made it quite clear she was desperate to see this entity survive, as she put it today, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, the point is that China is a hostile state. It should not have a stake in our major London supply of London and the South East Water Company. I mean, I don't understand how could be in a situation where China and Abu Dhabi own our water supply for London. It's just insane. Somewhere along the line, something really serious has gone badly wrong. And I don't see why taxpayers...
The state-owned China investment company, which the Eye suggests has been urged to shore up the firm and safeguard consumers. And Abu Dhabi as well. China has had its hand in a lot of companies, did it not, in terms of infrastructure, and that was the concern recently.
Yes, a huge concern. Sorry, Kevin.
No, sorry, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We were going to ask them to build a nuclear power station. They're in telecoms. Not all of it is bad, but I just think it's a weird world we live in when Abu Dhabi, China, and could have mentioned Canadian pension funds too, are owning water companies that are in danger of going bust. It's just a complete not a mess. I can see why Kemi Badenoch wants it to survive as an entity, because she hopes she doesn't have to get her hands dirty, as she will see it, and she'd certainly be just ideologically against taking it over, even for a short period of time. That's not her economics. She's all hands off Thatcherite economics. But I'm afraid it's just quite clear it hasn't worked with water. There's many parts of the economy that are very lively and vibrant and dynamic in the private sector, but water is not one of them.
Well, the Telegraph goes even further, suggesting that Whitehall was creating contingency plans to nationalise swathes of Britain's water industry as the country's biggest supplier teetered on the brink of collapse. A rescue deal could yet be agreed, but the suggestion is that there are fears that the collapse could trigger a domino effect across the industry, which is laden with £60 billion of debt built up during years of lower interest rates. And it does appear it is inflation and interest rates which are causing this issue at the moment, Sarah, too.
Well, yes. I mean, low interest rates have been a kind of fake thing for so long, and they've got lots of people in trouble. And these companies should really have known better. I mean, they've obviously been grotesquely mismanaged and used just as a sort of leverage tool for people, for the shareholders to reap dividends. And that's, this is water we're talking about. People can't just not have water. It's not, as Kevin says, it's a monopoly. It's not something that you can live without. You can go off grid with your electricity, I suppose, but you can't with water. You need to have water. It's a basic human right. So the idea that these companies have been borrowing low interest, borrowing huge sums of money, not investing in the infrastructure, because we know this, because the thing is full of leaks and is always breaking down, and endless sort of sewage being pumped into rivers and seas, and now they're in debt and they're coming to the taxpayer with their cap in hand. No, absolutely not, under no circumstances.
Well, Thames Water obviously said today that it was continuing to work with its shareholders as it sought more funding for its turnaround plan. So we watch and wait and see what happens. But let's move on. And Sarah, I'm going to stay with you if you don't mind, because you've written about this week in your column. This is the Metro picking up on Daniel Korski, the Tory mayoral hopeful, who'd been accused and denied groping a TV producer, has decided to step away from that race because it was a distraction. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting story, because the accusation is, and some of your listeners will know this because they will have listened to the radio and the TV throughout the course of the day, but the accusation is that 10 years ago, a TV producer was invited to Number 10 to discuss an idea for a show, and Dan Korski, who was then quite a senior, or a very senior span actually under David Cameron, flirted with her throughout the conversation, and then as she got up to leave, he touched her breast, and she said, "What on earth do you think you're doing?" And he sort of stopped, and that was the end of it. Anyway, she wrote about it, not naming him, I think 7 or 8 years ago, and anyway, she's now named him, and as a result, he has stood down. And it's caused. I mean, it's interesting because I've talked to lots of people about this today, and there sort of seems to be two camps. One, which is he's a disgusting sexual pervert. He shouldn't be running for mayor of London. And the other is, well, it was a mistaken or a botched attempt at flirtation or seduction or whatever, and it was 10 years ago, and he did stop when she told him to stop, and so why is this man's life being completely destroyed? I mean, what's interesting about it is it's very much a story for the Times, isn't it? Because this happens a lot to men. It doesn't really happen to women, but predominantly men. They get to a certain point in their careers, and then someone comes out of the woodwork and says, historic sexual accusations. There's no proof, because at the time she didn't report the incident. It's just a question of who you believe. He denies everything. She insists that it happened. Who are we supposed to believe? And the prevailing wind is believe the woman, because, women are often not believed in these circumstances. But I also personally don't think that it's entirely fair for someone to have their entire sort of life's work destroyed, because that's what is going to happen to him. I mean, I have no idea whether he would have made a good or bad London mayor. That's sort of neither here nor there, but basically politically he's finished. And I should imagine that personally he's now in a sort of bit of a difficult situation because of a historic sort of mistake, which, if you were in a court of law, what would it be? Would it even be sexual assault? I don't know. It could just be a cack-handed attempt at seduction. But we're a very judgmental society now, and any whiff of this sort of thing is basically spells the end for someone. A lot of my readers, I wrote about my own experience of having my breast groped at Number 10 at a party. And a lot of my readers have written in to say that similar things happened to them. They didn't find it offensive. They didn't find it debilitating. They just told the person to stop being so ridiculous and sort of slap them or whatever, just, push them away. It's about how we deal with these things. And there's a lot of debate around it. It is a huge debate.
Yes, and just to say that Daniel Korski said again today in his statement, he called it a false and unproven allegation, talked about the pressure on his family and the inability to get a fair hearing for his message, his campaign message, made it impossible for his campaign to carry on. So he's still denying the incident. Kevin, your thoughts? You were making some faces, I have to say, while Sarah spoke.
Yeah, well, Daisy Goodwin says she's written about it because Daniel Korski was posing as somebody who's going to make London safer for women. And her own experience was not that. I accept the denials from him, but you've got to decide who you believe. But just listen to Sarah. Sarah, in the old days when I used to go courting, trying to seduce somebody, I can't imagine at my place of work mistaking a signal and grabbing somebody's breast. I just don't get that. I mean, you might ask them out for a drink or come and watch Sunderland play football or something, but
I'm sure that was very popular.
In the scenario she has outlined, how that could be anything other than a grope and an assault.
Yeah, but I don't know, because I think the thing is that I mean, people's seduction techniques vary, don't they? So you don't know. He might have got the wrong end of the stick. And he obviously overstepped a mark. And at the time she said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And he stopped. So he clearly had overstepped a mark, and he shouldn't have been doing it in that situation. But people do stupid things, don't they? And what I don't understand, what I'm not sure is whether the punishment fits the crime in this instance. I don't know, because he hasn't had any kind of scrutiny of, there's been no attempt, there's no criminal investigation or anything. This is absolutely trial by media, and it's just one person's word against another. And I think we have to be a bit careful here, Kevin, because I could say I could write an article in the newspaper saying I had lunch with that Kevin Maguire the other day and he touched my knee, and you would be finished, even if it was not true.
I didn't know, did I?
We have to be careful here. I
didn't know, Sarah, did I?
No, of course not. But there are lots of women.
No, exactly. No.
There are lots of women who are genuinely sexually assaulted in the most appalling way. Most appalling way.
We're really running out of time. I hate to step in. It is a really interesting debate. The women need to be heard, but there needs to be a fair hearing. It's sort of where you're going, I think, with that, isn't it? But we'll talk again about that, no doubt. Lots more still to come. Just Stop Oil, Lords, your thoughts on that too. Back in a moment.
I thought it was so empowering. I mean, the nation, people who don't have Tourette's watched that and felt so touched. And now you imagine what the community, people who do have Tourette's felt. I mean, when we're growing up with this condition, it's harrowing. The bullying is relentless. We're in schools, people are picking on us the whole time because they don't understand what it is. So for the children of today to have seen Lewis on stage, to have seen the courage that he had, I mean, that sits in our hearts in such a beautiful way, and I think that gives us so much courage as well. Tourette syndrome is a neurological condition where we essentially have vocal or motor tics. So vocal could be a noise that we make, motor could be a movement. We have to have multiple of each for a certain period of time for it to be classified as Tourette syndrome. 90% of us do not swear. That is one of the major misconceptions about Tourette syndrome. And around 80 to 90% of us also have what I call co-occurring conditions, which could be ADHD, anxiety, all these different other conditions that could be a part of the package of Tourette syndrome.
And is it lifelong once you have it?
It is lifelong. For most people, the tics over time will come down a little bit, but for some people it can get worse. And we see with Lewis, his Tourette syndrome has come out when he's, entered his 20s, the era of his 20s. I think that when you get a diagnosis in general, when you're talking about Tourette's more, the tics can start to come out more, because when, if you sat me in a room with other people with Tourette's, my tics would get worse. Everyone thinks that we're this failure, that we'll never succeed, but the actuality is we're remarkable human beings. Our creativity is on a whole other level. When we rechannel the energy that goes into our tics and we put that into our passion points, what I call our superpowers, We're a force of nature. We will absolutely see Lewis perform again. This is his superpower. You know, when he sits down and he writes those lyrics and he goes on his piano and he's got the guitar and he's singing, he is in his place. I think what's happened right now is an overload of something that's new to him. I mean, it took me 15 years to talk about my Tourette's openly. I would run away, hide in a room, and it's like Harry Potter when people say Voldemort. That's essentially what it's like to people when it first comes out. It's like glass crashing all around them. To say that he's only been diagnosed within the past year and he's gone on that stage and he's sung his heart out, is that the courage in that is just absolutely beautiful.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Kevin Maguire from the Mirror and Sarah Vine from the Mail. Welcome back to both of you. Kevin, let's talk cricket, shall we? Or the Johnny Bairstow and his gym work proving useful today as he picked up one of those Just Stop Oil protesters like a sack of spuds and removed them from the outfield. What do you think about you know, the need to bring this to the attention versus the protection of people, whether they're driving or watching sport?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was you know, Bairstow's greatest catch by the wicket keeper there. I defend their right to protest, and my sympathy is with the cause on saving the planet. However, I think people aren't discussing the issue. They're just thinking these people are interrupting events and turning against them. So I can see how they're caught up in their little world, but these performances, I really don't think are helping. I mean, that's it, isn't it? Really, I mean, whether it's the powder on the snooker table up in Sheffield, whether it's this or stopping people getting into work by walking along roads. But I believe they have a right to protest, but I just think they're making a mistake now. It's counterproductive.
Yeah, Johnny stops oil, Ben can't stop the Aussies. I see the Telegraph pack pages just said, just stop Australia, keeping it even simpler, to be fair. But Sarah, there's been a genuine debate about this again this week, hasn't there, with Just Stop Oil. You know, is it working? And yet we have a report out today which shows that the government is failing on every single one, pretty much, of its targets, including, you know, new homes being built now, which would then have to be retrofitted in elements that would make them, better. Yeah. Carry on.
I think the thing about Stop Oil is that there's a single person on the planet who doesn't know that there's a problem with climate change. And so I think to an extent we're just raising awareness of the thing doesn't really work because everybody's very aware of it. And as Kevin says, I don't really see how their behaviour is going to improve the situation in terms of, you know, improving the climate problem. It just doesn't. It now just seems like theatre more than anything else, and I'm not sure that's what we need. These targets are very hard to meet. It's difficult to strike a balance between people being able to live the lives that they've got used to living with their lights and their air conditioning and their cars and all the sort of things that they have, and getting these and meeting these targets. That's the challenge for government. But I just don't understand where Just Stop will come in on all that.
Yeah, well, I suppose it means we're talking about it, which is what the supporters say. I see the Mailback page, shambolic. Everyone's had a bit of fun with it, certainly. Both of you, thank you. Kevin Maguire, Sarah Vine, thank you very much.